Holy Gospel according to Luke, the 12th chapter. Someone in the crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the family inheritance with me." But he said to him, "Friend, who set me to be a judge or arbitrator over you?" And he said to them, "Take care. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions." Then he told them a parable. The land of a rich man produced abundantly. And he thought to himself, "What should I do? For I have no place to store my crops." And then he said, "I will do this. I will pull down my barns and build larger ones. And there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, 'Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, be merry.' But God said to him, 'You fool, this very night your life is being demanded of you, and the things you have prepared, whose will they be? So it is with those who store up treasures for themselves, but are not rich toward God.'" The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. Please be seated. I heard somebody say something this past Tuesday, and she wasn't the first person I've ever heard say something like this, but I think she might be the first person I've ever heard it say it with such exuberantly beaming joy. I'm talking about one of my mother-in-law's soon-to-be neighbors at Oak Knoll, who, like my mother-in-law, because of the particular floor plan they chose, frankly, in my mother-in-law's case anyway, because it's the one she could afford, in order to move to Oak Knoll, they had to adjust to living in an apartment of approximately 500 square feet. Reflecting on that process, my mother-in-law's soon-to-be neighbor said to me this week, "It was so great. It was freeing to get rid of all that stuff." And then just because God loves to give me sermon illustrations anytime I need them, yesterday, some friends of ours from our Lake Mills, Iowa days came. Bill and Deb, they live in Florida now. They moved there to be near their daughter. When they moved there, they left their 2,600 square foot home with a triple garage and 2 heated outbuildings on 4 acres of land to move into a 900 square foot unit. And so they gave stuff away and sold stuff and gave stuff away and sold stuff and gave stuff away until everything that they owned on earth fit into a medium-sized U-Haul with a car trailer behind it. They too, yesterday, for goodness sakes, they said to me, beaming, "It was great. It was freeing to get rid of all that stuff." Now, those words, of course, can only be spoken by people whose hearts are in the exact opposite place of the heart of the man in the parable Jesus told today, as well as the man whose request to Jesus birthed the parable he told today. I'm talking about the man who, when Jesus was teaching a large crowd one day, shouted to him from the crowd, "Teacher, make my brother share the inheritance with me." Well, Jewish law in those days prescribed that at the death of a father, the eldest son was to receive a double portion, twice as much as the younger ones. By the way, daughters in those days didn't get anything unless there were no other sons. Which I think tells us that this man was probably a younger brother who, like his ancestor Jacob, the younger brother of Esau, years and years ago, clear back in the book of Genesis, at the very beginning of a people that would become known as the Jewish people, couldn't stand the unfairness, the inequity, the injustice of a legal system which gave more to his brother than it did to him. The young man, by the way, doesn't mention any concern about his sisters, which might mean that he doesn't have any sisters, but I've got a hunch means rather that the only injustices which bother him are the ones that he sees affecting he himself personally. This man, in other words, was not the first, and nor is he the last, to wrap the nice-sounding cloak of justice and fairness around a request he was making that wasn't, in fact, just or fair at all, because it was only and all about him. Justice, like its sister, liberty, isn't the real thing if it is just concerned about me. They are only real things if their concern, their striving, as the founders of this country knew, is a striving for liberty and justice for all, which wasn't at all this man's concern. Rabbi, teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me. Jesus, it turns out, had absolutely no interest in getting involved in the legalities of this dispute. He is, however, very interested in the heart of the disputant, as he's interested in the hearts of all people. So he says to the disputant and to us, to all, take care, beware, be on your guard against all kinds of greed, for life does not consist in the abundance of possessions. Note to self, possessions, stuff, things are mostly not, by and large, in and of themselves, inherently bad or inherently good. But if you ask your possessions, your stuff, things, to give you life, to make you happy, to be your purpose, well, take care. Beware. Be on your guard, Jesus says, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions. The writer of the book of Ecclesiastes, traditionally thought to be King Solomon, but probably not. The writer of the book of Ecclesiastes was someone who apparently was very rich. And in our lesson today, you could hear this. Near the end of his life, he realized that he was depressed, I think we would say today. He was severely depressed because he realized he'd spent his whole life working and sacrificing and doing without in order to obtain all the stuff he now had, except that he now realized that in no time at all he was just going to die. And you can't take it with you. And so all the stuff he'd worked and sacrificed and done without for was now for free, going to end up in the hands of a bunch of ingrates who'd not done anything for it. Living your life only for the accumulation of things, he concludes, albeit a little late to do much good for himself, living your life only for the accumulation of things, he says, is vanity. Vanity being the best English word the translators of the NRSV could come up with for the Hebrew word hevel, which literally means vapor, mist. And so, which suggests here today, gone tomorrow, meaninglessness, purposelessness, none of it worth ultimately anythingness. The writer of Ecclesiastes wrote his book lamenting that he was going to die rich. The young man in our gospel spoke up to Jesus complaining because he was dying to be rich. To them both, to all, the rich as well as the dying to be so, Jesus says, take care, beware, be on your guard, for life does not consist in the abundance of possessions. And then he tells that story. The land of a rich man, he said, produced abundantly. And he thought to himself, what should I do? For I have no place to store my crops. And then he said, I will do this. I will pull down my barns and I will build bigger ones. And then I will store all my grain and all my goods. And I will say to my soul, soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, be merry. Oh, my goodness. The self-deception, the lies we tell ourselves, the illusions we craft for ourselves once we fall for the illusion that in fact life darn well is about the abundance of possessions. What should I do? For I have no place to store my crops, the man says to himself. That's not true. He's got barns full of stored crops. He's got barns full of everything he needs. He just doesn't have barns for it all. Someone asked John D. Rockefeller, one of the wealthiest people at the beginning of the last century, how much wealth does it take to satisfy a person? And you may know John D. Rockefeller's answer, just a little bit more. Needing more. Falling for the illusion. And therefore needing more room. I know, the man says to himself, I'll pull down my barns and build bigger ones, and then I will store all what? All of my grain, my goods, my stuff. Here's something telling. It's a very short parable. Here's a list of the pronouns used in it. He, himself, I, my, 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 my. Then comes the pronoun Jesus uses. You, fool. And why is he a fool? Well, count the ways. Start with the pronouns. I read somewhere that nature provides 95% of the energies necessary to produce a crop, and the farmer provides 5%. Yet in this story, this farmer uses the words I and my as though he's the only one responsible for it all. Life will not be lived well. It will be lived foolishly by the one who thinks that he or she is the source of it all and the reason for it all. The man is a fool too, and the parable tells us this, for his failure to realize that life will not be lived well, it will be lived foolishly by the one who thinks that having everything we need, we nevertheless need more. Rather than realizing what Jesus and the prophets and all of Scripture say all over the place, and that is that blessed beyond what we need, we are blessed to be a blessing, providing for the needs of others. St. Jerome, who was most known for his translation of the Scriptures into Latin, wrote in the 4th century about Saint Marcella of Rome. He described her as a woman who preferred to store her money not in her purse. She liked to store her money in the stomachs of the hungry. Finally, the man is a fool because of a line that I've never really noticed before, paid attention to before in this parable, but it caught my attention this time. I'm talking about Luke 12:19, where the rich man says, I will say to my soul, soul, you have all this stuff piled up. Be happy. It doesn't get any better than this. Why is the man a fool? Because you may be able to convince yourself You may be able to convince that face in the mirror that life is defined and made good and made worth living by stuff, but don't try to convince your soul. Souls know better. And God does too. And so God in Jesus' parable says to the rich man trying to convince his soul how happy he is because he's so rich, God says, "You fool, this very night your life's being demanded of you, and all those things you've prepared, whose will they be?" So it is, Jesus concludes, with those who store up treasures for themselves, but are not rich toward God. So St. Paul says, in our second reading from the book of Colossians today, if you have been raised with Christ, seek the things that are above, where Christ is, seated at the right hand of God. Set your mind on things that are above, not on things that are on earth, which, let us be very clear, does not mean being so preoccupied with heaven and God and spiritual things that you see nothing or care nothing about people or life or circumstances around you here on earth. It means so filled with the true riches and treasure of all that God has done for you and given you and promised you, you see, like you've never seen before, people and life and circumstances all around you here on earth, because your heart and soul are so filled with God that you at last see with the eyes of God. And what you see then are there are many things you have that can never be taken from you because they aren't things. And what you see are the many riches you have that you didn't do anything for because they are gifts, grace, yours for free. And what you see is that there are gifts you have, there are things you have, some of which you maybe, darn it, worked very hard for, but it is more than you need. Way more than your soul needs. And what you see now is that there are things that love could do with them. And what you see is Jesus, who, though in today's gospel text chose not to be a judge in an inheritance squabble, one day will be your judge. But that is not a frightening thought to you, because you already know the judgment. You've known it in the waters of your baptism. You've known it in the bread and wine of his meal. You've known it from his cross. You've known it from his empty tomb. The judgment is this: you are loved. You are loved here, you are loved now, you are loved forever, which leaves you knowing and never getting tired of saying thank you for the fact that, oh my God, you are rich. Amen.